Hey there guys, we're taking a look at Injustice 2 running on the AMD Ryzen 5 5500U. Now the game is currently running at 1080p with the lowest in-game graphics settings. And of course we are running the system currently at the stock 15-watt TDP, and the system is paired with 16 gigabytes of 3200 megatransfers DDR4 RAM. Remember the level of performance that we're getting here in the built-in benchmark, which the game actually makes you run before you can even start doing multiplayer. You can see that the level of performance that we're getting here is just not going to be something that's doable. It's pretty much just running the game at half speed because we are barely even getting a 30 FPS average. Of course, if we raise the TDP up to 25 watts at the full 1080p resolution, unfortunately, we don't really see much of an uplift at all here, where we were really just struggling before to even get a 30 FPS average, coming out with a final score of 32 average. Here you're seeing that we're not seeing much of an improvement at all in terms of the overall performance here, and the game is just going to end up telling us that this is not going to be a playable experience for the multiplayer. And you can just see that as the game is running, it is running at half speed because of that performance issue there. And you'll see that the game is just telling us we're getting low performance overall. And if we bump up the TDP all the way up to the 30-watt TDP using the AMD APU tuning utility to use the performance preset, which is a setting I don't recommend you use most of the time, you'll see that the game is actually not even fully utilizing that TDP. Our GPU is pretty much already maxed out in terms of speed, and you'll see that the CPU is actually not even really being fully utilized. Only one core is being used here. So what's ending up happening is that the game itself really can't squeeze out any more performance because it doesn't need any more CPU. Really, it's just GPU limited at this point. And since the GPU is already at max clock, it didn't really need that extra power, and we see pretty much no gain whatsoever in terms of performance, really. Now, dropping things down to 900p and going back to the stock 15-watt TDP, you can see here that overall the game is actually running faster here. You'll see that the in-game speed is actually noticeably faster, though it's still not at full speed because we are still going below that 60 FPS average here. So what ends up happening is that we're at least getting some pretty solid 1% lows, and you'll see that our frame times are pretty consistent, but we are still not running at full speed, specifically because of the fact that we are not getting that 60 FPS average. So we still get a low performance score in the end. Of course, if we raise the TDP up to 25 watts here, you'll see that overall the performance gain that we're seeing is actually pretty much negligible. There's really no noticeable performance difference really overall. We're talking about maybe a couple of FPS difference here. It's not going to make any major difference in terms of the playability of this, especially if you want to play this online. If you only care about the story, you could potentially get through it like this. But if you're looking to actually play this in any semblance of a competitive setting, you're not really going to be able to do it at all. So we end up in another situation of just getting a low performance score. And again, the 30-watt TDP does not end up being fully utilized because the game doesn't really need that extra level of performance. We are pretty much just still super GPU limited here, and that's kind of why we're getting the very minimal gains that we're getting here, though at least our 1% lows now are in the 40 range. So this is the most consistent that we've seen it so far. It's decently playable for the most part, really, but online play is just completely out of the question. Of course, if we drop down to 720p, I was really hoping to see a bigger gain than this, really. We're back down to the stock 15-watt TDP, but you'll see that the gains that we're having here, while significant compared to 1080p and 900p at the stock settings, overall, we're still not perfect, but it is very playable, especially if you're at the stock 15-watt TDP, and it's the first time that we actually get a medium score. And of course, raising the TDP up to 25 watts does also see a small gain in terms of the performance, but it is not making any major differences or anything like that. Overall, the performance ends up being very similar to where we were at the stock settings. Again, the most playable experience that we've seen as of yet, but nothing groundbreaking, and it's still not at the ideal 60 that you'd like to see, but we do end up with a medium score again. Now, running the game at the 30-watt TDP at 720p, again, the best result that we've seen so far, but no major gains are being made here. So there are just minuscule improvements that overall, even with a aggressive drop in resolution all the way down to 720p, it just does not do enough to change what we're getting out of this. So in general, we still end up with a medium score here. Definitely playable for single player, but I just would not really recommend trying to play the multiplayer like this. It's unfortunate that the scores we were getting even at 720p were not ideal here. So it's one of those things where you have to make a judgment call for yourself on whether or not it's going to be even worth trying to play this. If you care about the story and that's about it, you could probably play the game perfectly fine like this, but just know that if you're trying to do multiplayer, you're not going to be able to do it. But anyways, I hope you found this video useful. If you did, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.